Hey guys, my name's Ben Voigt and I'm an engineer here at CNC Labs. Behind me is the alt mill, and I'm going to be walking you guys through on the assembly process and giving you a couple tips and tricks along the way. Let's get to it. Before we get started assembling, I want to talk you through some best practices. Due to the weight of several components, it is highly recommended that you assemble the alt mill with another person. The expected assembly time is between 5 and 8 hours. So make sure to allot ample time and pace yourself to avoid any errors, damages, or injury during the process. Before tightening any fasteners, take note of whether they should be firmly or loosely secured. Some steps require that screws be intentionally left loose so that components can be aligned in later steps. It is recommended that fasteners be left in their respective bag until needed. If at any point you think you are missing any fasteners or components, you can check the unboxing section of the alt mill resources page on our website, where there is a detailed list of everything included in the package. Additionally, due to us constantly innovating and improving our products, it makes it possible that parts of this video become slightly out of date. For your best assembling experience and to ensure you're receiving the most up-to-date instructions, please use this video alongside the alt mill resources page on our website. We're going to be using the 4mm hex drive to install the M6x12 button head cap screws into the M6 roll-in T-nuts through these two slotted holes of the Y-axis end plate. Remember to thread the M6 into the flat face of the T-nut and leave it loose so you can slide the end plate onto the crossbeam. Keep in mind the orientation of the Y-axis end plates while installing the fasteners, as once you install them, there will be a right hand and a left hand side. These are the left and right Y rails and the 5 cross beams. Something to keep in mind when you're laying it out is look for the large bearing block and put that to the back. The motor is going to mount on the back of the machine. Also, something to note is the orientation of the cross beams. With the cross beams, what you're going to want to make sure is that this flange is pointing inward on the back and the front. The other 3 can have the flange either direction, but we recommend that you put the first 4 in the same direction and the last pointing inward. When installing the cross beams, make sure not to remove this 3D printed foot, or else the Y rail will fall over like this. Tighten these up only so they're snug. You can leave one loose, only tighten one. You're going to be sliding it later on. We're going to be using the M5x16mm cap screws, screwing into the top holes. And what we're going to do is we're going to screw all the cross beams in with the top holes on the one side, move to the other side, do the same thing, flip the tabletop. Then we're going to move on to installing all the bottom row as well. Something to keep in mind is the bearing blocks on the front and the back will block one of the upper holes. So you're not going to be able to install a screw on those. On the front and the back crossbeam, there's only going to be 2 screws installed. I like to stick the screw first through the Y-axis rail and then bring the crossbeam into mesh. While installing the screws, make sure the bottom of the crossbeam is contacting the reference lip on the Y rail. Only tighten these screws snug for now. When you're doing the second side, be sure to leave them loose so you have room while you're installing the screws on each of the cross beams. At first, only install one screw in a cross beam at a time while you're working on the second side to help you with alignment. Then go back and install the remaining screws into the upper row, making sure all fasteners are snug. We're now at the section where we're going to be flipping the tabletop over. It's not recommended to flip the table by yourself, so if you can find somebody to help you, that'd be the best thing to do. Luckily, I've got my friend Scott here, and we're going to be flipping the table together.
I'm holding on the ball screw, that's hilarious.
When you're flipping the machine, make sure not to hold the ball screw. Now's the time to install the rest of the fasteners into the cross beams and tighten up the rest of the screws that are already inserted. Make sure not to loosen these too much so that you unscrew the bolt from the roll-in T-nut. And then slide the end cap over the Y-rail, inserting one of the M6 by 16 millimeter button head cap screws into just the top hole. Then once you flip the machine over, in a few steps from now, we're going to insert the other two. You only need to tighten these to a snug fit for now. In this section, we're going to be putting the first two legs onto the tabletop while it's flipped over. We're going to start with putting two roll-in T-nuts into the T-slot on the crossbeam. Locating the T-nuts with the slots on your leg is a little bit tricky, so you're going to want to take some care. You can use your key to find the T-nut in there and make sure you've got it in the right place. Before you put a screw on the first one, make sure both T-nuts are located. I'm going to use two M6 by 12 millimeter long button head cap screws with a washer to fasten the table legs to the side of the crossbeam. Now the washers are in the part 2 bag of fasteners, so make sure to find them in there. Don't tighten those screws all the way in just yet. Wait until you've fastened the leg to the Y-rail before you tighten the screws into the crossbeam. You can note that you use the bottom slots for the Y-rail and the upper slots for the crossbeam. Now you're going to want to put a foot on each of the legs. You're only going to take one nut off and leave this one on. Leave it loose so that you can adjust the level later on. So now we've flipped the table and we're going to be installing the second two legs. For this section, you're going to want to prop the table up using a mid-sized bar stool like this one, or a step ladder or stool. If your stool isn't the correct height, you can always use these packaging cushions to prop it up so that you have enough room to attach the legs. Before installing the legs, make sure to put the feet on. Oh yeah, Scott's on fire. He's a menace to society. Once you've got the legs attached, you can put the M6 by 16 millimeter button head cap screws into the last two holes of the Y-axis end plate. Loosen that off a touch so you can move them around. Now we've got all 4 legs on the machine, and we need to make sure the tabletop is as close to level as we can make it. So you're going to want to check the front, both sides, and the back. Now, the main intention of getting this level is to make sure there's no skew in the machine between the 2 Y rails, which can possibly cause issues later on while attempting to make a flat surface of your wasteboard. There it is, it's level. We're going to install these bump stops onto the Y-axis end plates on the inside. The screws we're going to use are the M5 by 16 millimeter long. Here are the 2 gantry plates. The left side has a hole for the stepper motor to go through. We're going to be using M4 by 16 millimeter long socket head cap screws to attach the X gantry plate to these linear guide blocks. Also note that we're going to be using the 3 millimeter hex key. Leave the first one a little loose. The second screw go into the second linear guide block. Once you've inserted all the screws, don't tighten all the way, just tighten to snug. Slide the loose assembly over the linear ball screw nut. Use the M5 by 16 millimeter long socket head cap screws to fasten the gantry plate to the aluminum block. Loosely tighten the screws into the aluminum block. We'll tighten those later on. You can push the X gantry plates up to the end stops. Now install the remaining 2 fasteners loosely, I might add. Loose. Tighten to snug. Tighten to snug. You need to insert 4 35 millimeter long button head cap screws, M6s, into the top section of the X rail. Make sure that there's a washer on. Do not insert all the way. Now it's time to put the X rail onto the X gantry plates, and it's a little bit heavy, so if you don't think you can do it by yourself, ask a friend.
You think you can do it yourself?
I think I need a friend.
I've always wanted to have a friend.
You need to get a friend like Scott. Start with the front slot of the gantry plate and then rotate in until the second one sits into its seat. There is a reference edge on the right side gantry plate that the rail sits against. You can make sure that it's sitting against that reference edge. Install the remaining fasteners into the bottom of the rail. Do not install fully. Leave these fasteners loose. You can snug up the top fasteners as well. On the left side, that's the side with the hole for the stepper motor. You're going to want to use a ratcheting clamp, or a clamp of some sort, to make sure that the rail is pressed against the reference edge of the gantry plate. At this point, we can begin tightening the screws into the X rail. Now that you've finished tightening the screws into the X rail, you can finish tightening up all the rest of the fasteners on the gantry plate. Start with the linear guide blocks. Make sure that the reference lip of the gantry plate is against the reference edge of the guide blocks. Finish up by tightening the remaining 4 screws into the aluminum block. Once all the fasteners are tightened up, you can remove the clamp, and now you've got your X gantry assembled. We're going to install the spindle mount onto the Z gantry assembly. Start with the shoulder screws. Now on the bottom, you're not going to be able to put that shoulder screw in there. The shoulder screws go to the top. Tighten the side with the slot first. After you've tightened the shoulder screws, you can insert and tighten the M6 by 25 millimeter long button head cap screws. Using 2 M5 by 10 millimeter long socket head cap screws, attach the drag chain bracket into the back of the Z gantry assembly. Tighten the shoulder bolt into the seat. Snug. Do not tighten this bolt all the way. Tighten that up. With the M6 by 16 millimeter long button head cap screws, we're going to fasten the Z carriage plate against the X gantry plate. And you can tighten these right up. We're going to be installing the 3 couplers onto the 3 different stepper motors. Now, if you notice, the couplers have a larger and a smaller diameter. Make sure that you use the smaller diameter side to go over the motor shaft. It's going to be snug. One thing to note is when you're putting the coupler onto the motor shaft, bottom out the coupler until it reaches the plastic, until you can't push it on any further. Then tighten it up. Do that for all 3 motors. On the motors, confirm that the dip switches are in the correct position. These positions can be found on the CNC Labs website in the Altmill resources for installation, motors. The correct positions for the dip switches are 1, 2, 3 down, 4, 5 up. The dip switch positions are the same for all 3 motors, X and the 2 Ys. One thing to note for the Z motor is that the dip switch orientation for number 3 is up. 1, 2 down, 3, 4, 5 up. The dip switches should come to you in these orientations, but it's good to double check. When installing the motor, make sure to put it in this orientation. You'll note the power and the controls. Can't find the shaft. Okay. To install the motors, use the M5 by 10 millimeter long socket head cap screws. Using the 3 millimeter drive, tighten the coupler onto the ball screw shaft. We're going to install the second 2 motors on the back of the machine on each side for the Y drives. And keep in mind that same orientation. You've got the power to the left and the communication controls to the right. Tighten these screws right up. And with the 3 millimeter drive, tighten this coupler. These 4 links are going to make up the 2 drag chains. We're going to prepare them for later by taking off the 4 end links. First, let's cut them open. There's 2 types of drag chain ends to note. One that has a knob and one that has a hole. The end that has a hole is the end that's going to be used on the dust shield and fastened to the dust shield. Make sure that you have one of each type of connector per drag chain. At this step, we're going to be installing the dust shields. We're going to start on the left-hand side, and that's the side that the drag chain is going to be on. So we're going to install this small clip onto the very front of it. We're going to use M5s and T-nuts to fasten the dust shield into the Y-rail. While installing the dust shields, be sure to note the orientation of this notched cutout. Have the notch facing to the inside of the table. While installing the clip, we're going to use an M5 socket head cap screw by 10 millimeter long. For all the other fasteners on the dust shield, we're going to be using button head cap screws by 8 millimeters long. This is the only one that's different. While installing the T-nut, pay special attention to the orientation. That is to have the angles on the bottom. While installing the T-nut onto the M5, leave it loose to be able to slide through the T-slot of the Y-rail. After the clip is installed, install M5 by 8 millimeter long button head cap screws into the T-nuts for the remaining 3 holes in the dust shield. Then do the same for the other dust shield, the right side.
So helpful having Scott here.
Do your best to align the T-nuts with the length of the dust shield to make it easier while you're sliding the dust shield into the T-slot. Insert the dust shield so it comes to the end of the Y rail. Fully tighten all hardware fastening the dust shields to the Y rail. To make a drag chain, you're going to need to connect the two lengths. You do it by clicking them together.
Got the outtakes on this. I'm gonna be releasing.
The recommended number of links on the drag chain for the y-axis is 50 links, and the recommended number of links on the x-axis is 47. Now when I say links, I mean you can count these top tabs. Don't include the end clips. 2, 4, 6, 48, 50.
Yeah.
50.
50.
Once you've counted the length of one drag chain, you can use that number to figure out the second. In this case, we know that this drag chain is 50 links long, and the second drag chain we need to be 47. You need to prepare the drag chains by unclipping all the clips along the length of them so that you can easily put the wires into the drag chain. Now that you've gone through the annoying process of unclicking all these clips, if you'd like, you can remove every second one to reduce the amount of time it takes to unclip and reclip your drag chain if you ever need to remove a cable. We're going to install the second end of the Y drag chain to the top of the X rail, right here. Using the T-nuts and the M5 by 10 millimeter long socketed cap screws. Drop the T-nut in the pocket and slide it along. We need 3 T-nuts put into the X rail to install the ends of the Y and X drag chain. By eye, try to align the 2 links with each other. Next, use the end link with a hole on the end, and using the middle hole, fasten it onto the X rail. Leave it a little loose for now. Using the last end link that has the knobs on the side, place it on top of the drag chain bracket of the Z carriage plate. And you're gonna use 2 fasteners, also using a nut. Be sure to note the orientation of the end link where the knobs are facing that direction. The drag chain is gonna wrap up, come around like this. Moving on to wiring, start with your bag of 4 sensors. Start with just one nut. And as a small guideline, take another nut and bring the first one down until the length of the flat to flat is about the top. Just like that. Do that for all 4 sensors, and then insert the lock washer on top as well for each. Using some tape, label the ends of each of the axes. At this point, it doesn't matter which one you choose. X, Z, Y1, Y2. The left side of the machine that has the X motor on it as well is the Y1 side of the machine. Adjust how far the sensor sticks out from the end plate until it reaches almost the distance that the stop is. You can use the included wrench to show. Note that the sensor cannot stick out past the rubber stop. The Y2 sensor goes on the right side of the machine at the back near the motor. The Z sensor goes in through the back of the carriage plate and cannot stick out past the distance of this pocket. The X sensor gets inserted into the gantry plate that the motor is also connected to. Use the wrench to make sure that the sensor is sticking out the correct amount. Moving on to the motor cables. This is the side that gets connected to the motor, and this is the side that gets connected to the motor. I'm sorry.
So both are going to
Yeah. What you do is you just plug them all into the motor.
cross your fingers and go.
Moving on to the motor cables. This is the side that gets connected to the motor, and this is the side that gets connected to the controller. On the controller side, using a piece of tape, mark where you have used the cable. For this, I'm going to write down Y1. Use a small screwdriver to tighten the cable going into the motor power. Do the same thing attaching the cables into each of the motors, and label the controller side with a piece of tape so you know which motor it's connected to. In this bag you'll find motor harness clips and various sizing zip ties to neatly attach the wires to the machine. No need to go too tight on those. Bring the cables from the Y1 motor along and attach it using a zip tie through this cable mount. Using a second zip tie, loop it through the bottom of the cable mount and put the cables from the Y2 motor through on the bottom. So you're going to have two sets of cables on this motor mount nearest the Y1 side. Put a cable clip near the Y rail on each of the cross beams. Using zip ties in the bottom slot on the cable hanger, insert the zip tie through, group the set of 4 wires, and for now, you can leave the zip tie a little loose. If you purchase the CNC Lab spindle kit, take out the VFD and attach it to the VFD mounting bracket. The face that you're going to attach to is the one with the cutouts. The L that sticks out is on the left side when you're looking at it. You're going to attach it using the M5 lock nuts and M5 by 16 millimeter long socket head cap screws. Using 2 M5 by 16 millimeter long socketed cap screws, attach the VFD and bracket to the inside of the leg. Align it with this pocket, and you're going to screw in from this side. 1 and 2. Bring the spindle cable around the back side of the leg and wrap it around. Bring it around the back and over top the X rail and towards the Y gantry assembly. Place the styrofoam box underneath the spindle mount so you can rest the spindle while inserting it. Make sure the screws for the spindle mount are loosened fully so it is not clamped. You're going to need to use a tape measure for this step. Confirm that the spindle is sticking out the bottom of the mount by about 4.5 inches. It should work out that way if you rest it against the spindle box. Tighten the bracket screws and go back and forth between the 2 screws while tightening to ensure even clamping. Be sure to match the teeth with the slots on the spindle for the spindle cable when inserting it. Tighten it down by hand. Group all the cables from the Y assembly and begin fitting them into the drag chain. Reclip some of the clips on the drag chain to hold the cables as needed. Be sure to leave a fair amount of slack on the spindle cable so that it's able to reach the lower limit of the travel for the Z-axis. It's time to tighten these down. Remember to grab the cables from the X-axis as well. Group them together with the Z. Fit them through this end link. And then bring your drag chain up and clip that first one together so they all fit in. With patience, come along and fit all these cables into the drag chain, occasionally clipping a clip up to make sure they stay in place. Throw these clips all the way back so they stay in place and stay out of your way, makes it a bit easier. That clip right in the center of that pocket there is a good one to clip down. Now you can close all the clips on the drag chain. Take the bundle of wires and loop them together using a zip tie. If you didn't buy the spindle kit, then you'll be installing the e-stop using this plate that fits in the pocket of the leg. You fit the M5 Nylock nuts into the back of the plate. To secure the e-stop, use M5 by 16 millimeter long socket head cap screws. If you did buy the spindle kit, then you'll be mounting the e-stop to the mounting bracket of the VFD. There are two threaded holes that you're going to screw the M5 by 16 millimeter long socket head cap screws. This here is the SLB control board. It's going to be mounted to the side leg just underneath the e-stop. And you're going to come in from behind the leg with two M5 by 10 millimeter long socket head cap screws to fasten it. Take the cover off by loosening the thumb screw, sliding, and rotate out. Looking at the inside of the SLB, the white ports are for the sensors, the black for the motor controls, and the green ports for the motor power. The motor power cables can be connected to any of the four inline green ports. But take extra care to ensure the sensor and motor control cables are connected correctly to the respectively labeled white and black ports. We're starting with the X and Z cables, which come out of the drag chain around and over the SLB. Bring the cables in through the side of the SLB board. Y1, Y1, Y2, You're going to want to clean up the remaining cable slack by using the zip ties and also using the cable clips that are already there. So for the Y cables, we recommend looping them back and forth in the same position where they're already coming from, and taking extra care because the Y2 cables are a little bit longer than the Y1. Scott, can you hold these?
What do I look like?
A nice guy.
Clearly wrong.
For the X and Z cables, we recommend grouping the excess slack together behind this leg. Plug the e-stop cable in. This side goes into the e-stop button and this side into the controller. If you purchase the AutoZero touch plate, this is where you plug the cable in. This is the power supply and it gets plugged into this side of the controller. The VFD controls cable is plugged into this port of the controller. The USB-C to USB cable that will plug into your computer is plugged in here, where it says USB. This side is plugged into your computer. Now that you've checked to make sure that everything is plugged in and wired the way you like, it's time to turn the machine on. Due to a safety feature in the control board, the power is not automatically turned on when the switch is turned on. To make the control board operational, simply press the e-stop and unlatch it. You should see two green lights and a red on this side. And once you press the e-stop and unlatch it, you'll notice a blue come on. All right, the machine's all together. You've turned it on. Now it's time to go to the resources page and start learning how to make those first movements on your alt mill. I really enjoyed walking you guys through this process, and I hope you had a good time as well. If you want more tips and tricks just like this, please make sure to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you had any thoughts while you were putting your machine together, then leave them in the comments. Until next time, CNCers, goodbye.